The smoke rose high into the orange sky of Kepler 442b. The war was over. The humans had lost. Commander Zaxthul walked through the broken streets of New Haven, colony with heavy metal boots that made the ground shake with each step. His massive frame cast long shadows across the rubble and twisted metal that used to be homes where families lived and children played. Behind him, 3 other Zephyrian soldiers followed in formation. Their armor gleamed silver in the alien sunlight, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. They moved like machines, scanning for any signs of human life that might have survived the final battle. The orders were clear: eliminate all survivors. Leave nothing behind. Zaxthul stood 12 feet tall, his body covered in thick armor that made him look like a walking fortress. His helmet covered most of his face, but his glowing red eyes could be seen through the dark visor. He had fought in this war for over 10 years, and he had never questioned his orders. Humans were the enemy. They were weak, emotional creatures who fought without logic. The galaxy would be better without them. The DreadWalker stopped at what used to be the colony's main square. A fountain lay in pieces, its water long since dried up. Buildings around the square had collapsed, their walls blown apart by plasma. Cannons. The silence was complete except for the distant crackling of fires that still burned in some parts of the city. "Sector 7 clear, Commander," reported Lieutenant Vexmar through the comm system. His voice sounded metallic through the speakers built into their helmets. "Sector 9 also clear," added Sergeant Colfus from somewhere behind a pile of concrete and steel. Zaxthul nodded, but said nothing. Something felt different about this place. In all his years of war, he had grown used to the aftermath of battle. Usually, there was nothing left but destruction and death. But here, something seemed odd. His thermal sensors were picking up faint heat signatures from several locations around the square. He moved toward the largest reading, which seemed to be coming from behind what looked like the remains of a supply depot. The building had mostly collapsed, but part of one wall still stood. Behind it, several large metal crates were stacked against each other, forming a makeshift shelter. The commander's sensors told him that whatever was inside was small and warm. Probably an animal of some kind. Many planets had creatures that survived in the ruins after battles. Usually, they were scavengers looking for food among the wreckage. Zaxthul pushed aside one of the crates with his massive, armored hand. The metal groaned and scraped against the concrete as it moved. Behind it was a smaller crate, this one marked with faded symbols from the Earth Federation. The heat signature was coming from inside. He grabbed the top of the crate and pulled it open with a sharp crack of breaking metal. What he found inside made him freeze completely. A human baby lay wrapped in what looked like a torn military jacket. The child was tiny, probably no more than 6 months old. Her skin was pale, and her hair was soft and blonde. She looked up at the massive alien warrior with bright blue eyes that seemed to sparkle with curiosity. Zaxthul stared down at the infant, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This was not what he had expected to find. The baby should have been afraid. She should have been crying or trying to hide from the terrifying figure looming over her. Instead, she looked directly at him with those innocent eyes and made soft, cooing sounds. The DreadWalker's training kicked in immediately. This was a human survivor. His orders were to eliminate all human survivors. The baby was small and helpless. It would take only seconds to complete the mission and move on to the next sector dot, but something stopped him. The child reached up with one tiny hand, her fingers opening and closing as if she wanted to touch his armor. She made more soft sounds, almost like she was trying to talk to him. Her eyes never left his visor, and there was no fear in them at all. For the first time in his military career, Commander Zaxthul hesitated. "Commander, what is your status?" The voice of Lieutenant Vexmar came through his cum system, snapping him back to the present moment. Zaxthel looked down at the baby again. She had somehow managed to grab hold of the torn jacket she was wrapped in and was chewing on one corner of it. When she saw him looking at her, she smiled. It was a genuine, innocent smile that lit up her entire face. The massive warrior felt something strange happening in his chest. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. The baby's smile seemed to reach something deep inside him that he didn't even know existed. His hand, which had been moving toward his weapon, stopped completely. "Commander?" The voice came again, more urgent this time. "Still searching," Zaxthel replied, his voice steady despite the confusion in his mind. "Continue with your sectors." "Understood, sir." The baby made more sounds, this time reaching both hands toward him. Without thinking, Zaxthel moved his massive armored finger closer to her. She immediately grabbed onto it with both tiny hands, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Her touch sent a shock through his entire system. This was wrong. Everything about this situation went against his training, his orders, and everything he had been taught about humans. They were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be afraid. This tiny creature should have been terrified of him, not reaching out to him like he was someone she trusted. But as he looked down at her, Zaxthel realized something that shook him to his core. This baby was not weak. Despite being alone in a war zone, despite losing everyone and everything she had ever known, she was still smiling. She was still reaching out with hope and trust. There was a strength in her that he had never seen before, not even in the most hardened warriors of his own kind. The sound of approaching footsteps made him act quickly. He carefully lifted the baby from the crate, jacket and all, and activated the emergency medical bay built into his armor. The small chamber was designed to protect wounded soldiers, but it would serve a different purpose now. As the infant disappeared into the protective compartment, Zaxthel felt his heart pounding in a way it never had before. He had just made a decision that could cost him everything. If his superiors discovered what he had done, he would face execution for treason. But when he thought about those bright blue eyes and that innocent smile, he knew he could not have made any other choice. Sergeant Kolthes appeared around the corner of the collapsed building, his weapon ready. "Commander, we heard movement. Is everything secure?" Zaxthel stood up to his full height and looked at his subordinate with the same commanding presence he had always shown. "Sector clear. Just some debris shifting in the wind. Continue the sweep." "Yes, sir." As the other soldiers moved away to complete their search, Zaxthel felt the gentle movement of the baby inside his armor's medical bay. She was safe for now, but he had no idea what he was going to do next. All he knew was that something fundamental had changed in those few moments when a tiny human child had looked at him without fear and reached out with trust. The war might be over, but for Commander Zaxthel, a completely different kind of battle was just beginning. 3 days had passed since Commander Zaxthel found the human baby in the ruins of New Haven Colony. The Zephyrian military base hummed with activity as soldiers prepared for their next assignment on a different world. But Zaxthel could barely focus on anything except the tiny life hidden inside his quarters. He had managed to keep the baby secret during the journey back to base. The medical bay in his armor had kept her safe and quiet during transport. Now she was hidden in a small storage compartment he had modified in his private room. The space was cramped, but it was the best he could do without raising suspicion. The baby needed a name. Zaxthel had been thinking about this for hours. He looked through the small window in his quarters at the pale moon hanging in the alien sky. The humans had called their own moon Luna in their ancient language. It seemed fitting. "Luna," he whispered to the sleeping infant. She stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, but did not wake up. Even asleep, she looked peaceful and content. It amazed him how she could be so calm after everything that had happened to her world. That taking care of a human baby was nothing like what Zaxthel had expected. She needed food every few hours, and finding the right nutrition had become his biggest challenge. Human infants could not eat the same things as adult humans, and they certainly could not survive on Zephyrian military rations. He had spent the previous night accessing the base's medical database, searching for information about human biology and infant care. The computer system logged every search, but Zaxthel had been careful to make his queries look like routine intelligence gathering about enemy weaknesses. What he learned surprised him. Human babies were much more fragile than Zephyrian young, but they were also incredibly adaptable. They could survive in conditions that would kill the offspring of many other species. Their immune systems were weak at birth, but quickly learned to fight off diseases and infections. The most interesting thing he discovered was how human infants bonded with their caregivers. Unlike Zephyrian young, who were independent from birth, human babies needed constant care and attention. They formed emotional connections that lasted their entire lives. This explained why humans fought so desperately to protect their families. Even when victory was impossible. Luna woke up and immediately began making soft sounds. Zaxthel quickly moved to the hidden compartment and carefully lifted her out. She looked up at him with those bright blue eyes and smiled. That smile still did something strange to his chest, making him feel warm in a way he had never experienced before. "Are you hungry, little one?" he asked quietly, though he knew she could not understand his words yet. He had managed to steal some nutrition supplements from the medical bay that were designed for recovering soldiers. After studying human dietary needs, he had mixed them with water to create something that might work as baby food. It was not perfect, but Luna seemed to tolerate it well enough. As he fed her with a small medical tube, Zaxthel found himself talking to her about his day. It felt natural, even though she could not respond with words. She would look at him intently while he spoke, making little sounds that seemed like she was trying to join the conversation. "The other soldiers are getting suspicious," he told her, as she finished eating. "Lieutenant Vexmar asked why I have been spending so much time in my quarters. I told him I was writing reports about human battle tactics, but I do not think he believed me." Luna reached up and grabbed one of his large fingers with both tiny hands. Her grip was getting stronger every day. She pulled his finger toward her mouth and began chewing on the tip of his armor with her tiny teeth. A soft knock on his door made Zaxthel freeze. He quickly but gently placed Luna back in her hiding spot and activated the sound-dampening field he had installed. The technology was normally used to keep sensitive conversations private, but it worked just as well to muffle the sounds of a baby. "Come in," he called out after making sure everything looked normal. Sergeant Colthus entered the room and stood at attention. "Commander, General Vikvar wants to see you in his office immediately." Zaxthel felt his heart skip a beat. Had they discovered Luna? Had someone seen him accessing the medical database? He kept his expression calm and nodded. "I will be there shortly." After Colthus left, Zaxthel quickly checked on Luna one more time. She was already falling asleep again, her tiny fist curled up near her face. He whispered a promise that he would return soon, then left for what might be the most important meeting of his life. General Vikvar's office was located in the highest tower of the base. The walls were covered with maps of various star systems and battle plans for future campaigns. The general himself was an imposing figure, even larger than most DreadWalkers, with scars covering his armor from decades of warfare. "Commander Zaxthel," the general said, without looking up from the reports scattered across his desk. "Your squad's performance on Kepler 442b was exemplary. The human colony was eliminated with minimal casualties to our forces." "Thank you, sir," Zaxthil replied, standing at perfect attention. However, the general continued, finally looking up with his glowing red eyes, there have been some concerning reports from the intelligence division. It seems someone has been accessing classified information about human biology and physiology. The searches were traced back to terminals in this sector. Zaxthil's mind raced, but he kept his voice steady. Perhaps someone is gathering intelligence for future operations against human settlements, sir. Perhaps, General Vekvar said slowly. But the specific nature of these searches suggests something else. Information about human infants and child care is not relevant to military operations. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the base's power systems. Zaxthil could feel the general's eyes studying him, looking for any sign of deception. Every instinct told him to confess, to explain everything, and hope for mercy. But then he thought of Luna's innocent smile and her tiny hands reaching out to him with complete trust. I have no knowledge of these searches, sir, he said firmly. General Vekvar stared at him for several long moments. Finally, he nodded. Very well. But I want you to know that I will be watching this situation closely. If there is a security breach in this base, I will find it and deal with it accordingly. Understood, sir. You are dismissed, Commander. Zaxthil walked back to his quarters as quickly as possible, without appearing to hurry. His mind was filled with worries about what would happen if Luna was discovered. The punishment for treason was death, but he found that he was more concerned about what would happen to her than what would happen to himself. When he opened the hidden compartment, Luna was awake and making soft crying sounds. The moment she saw him, she stopped crying and reached up toward him. Zaxthil carefully lifted her out and held her against his armored chest. I am sorry, little one, he whispered. I know this is not the life you should have. You should be with your own kind, in a place where you can run and play and be happy. But even as he said the words, Zaxthil realized something that surprised him. In just 3 days, this tiny human had become the most important thing in his world. The thought of losing her now filled him with a fear he had never known in all. His years of battle. Luna looked up at him and made a sound that almost sounded like Dada. It was probably just meaningless baby noise, but it made Zaxthil feel something he had never felt before. For the first time in his life, someone needed him, not as a soldier or a weapon, but simply as someone who cared. He was beginning to understand why humans fought so hard for their families. 6 months had passed since Zaxthil brought Luna to the Zephyrian military base. The tiny baby had grown into a curious toddler who could now walk with unsteady steps and speak simple words in both human and Zephyrian languages. She had become the center of Zaxthil's entire world, though nobody else on the base knew she existed. Luna had learned to be quiet during the day when other soldiers might hear her. She seemed to understand that their game of hiding was very important. When Zaxthil was away on duty, she would play quietly with the simple toys he had made for her from spare parts and metal scraps. She had turned his storage compartment into her own little world, complete with drawings on the walls that she had made with colored powders from the electronics lab. The most amazing thing about Luna was how fearless she had become. She would climb all over Zaxthil's massive armored form like he was her personal playground. She would grab onto his arm plates and swing back and forth, laughing with pure joy. Sometimes she would fall asleep, curled up against his chest while he worked at his desk, completely safe and content. Up, up, Luna would say in her small voice, reaching her arms toward him whenever he entered their hidden room. It was one of her favorite phrases, along with Zax, which was her version of his name, and hungry, which she had learned very quickly. Zaxthil had become an expert at caring for a human child. He knew exactly when she needed to eat, when she was tired, and when she just wanted attention. He had learned to read the different sounds she made and what each one meant. When she was happy, she would babble constantly and try to repeat words he said. When she was upset, she would make specific crying sounds that told him exactly what was wrong. The hardest part was not being able to give her everything she needed. Luna needed sunlight and fresh air, but taking her outside was impossible. She needed other people to play with, but Zaxthil was the only person in her world. Most of all, she needed the kind of love and attention that came naturally to humans, but that Zephyrians had never learned to give. Yet somehow, Zaxthil found that caring for Luna came naturally to him. He discovered feelings inside himself that he never knew existed. When she smiled at him, his chest filled with warmth. When she laughed, he felt happiness that was completely different from the satisfaction of winning battles. When she was sick or hurt, he felt fear that was stronger than anything he had experienced in combat. One evening, Luna developed a high fever that made her body burn hot to the touch. She was restless and crying, unable to sleep or eat. Zaxthil had never been so frightened in his life. He paced back and forth in his quarters, holding her against his chest and trying everything he could think of to help her feel better. "Please be all right, little one," he whispered to her as she cried weakly in his arms. "I do not know what I would do without you." He considered taking her to the medical bay, but that would mean revealing her existence to the base doctors. The risk was enormous, but watching her suffer was even worse. Finally, desperate to save her, he decided to access the medical computer one more time. The base's artificial intelligence system immediately detected human DNA signatures when he input Luna's symptoms. Warning messages began flashing on the screen, and Zaxthil knew that security would be alerted within minutes. But before he could shut down the system, something unexpected happened. Luna's fever broke on its own. Her tiny body relaxed in his arms, and her breathing became steady and peaceful. The crisis had passed as quickly as it had begun. Her immune system, which had seemed so fragile, had fought off whatever infection had made her sick. Zaxthil quickly erased his computer access logs and returned to his quarters with Luna sleeping soundly in his arms. As he watched her peaceful face, he realized something that changed his understanding of humans forever. They were not weak at all. They were incredibly strong, but their strength was different from Zephyrian power. Humans could survive things that would destroy other species, not because they were physically tough, but because they refused to give up. Luna had lost her family, her home, and her entire world, yet she still woke up every morning with a smile. She still reached out to him with trust and love, even though he belonged to the species that had destroyed everything she had ever known. Around the same time, disturbing reports began reaching the base from other sectors of the galaxy. Human settlements that had been completely destroyed were somehow rebuilding themselves. Survivors who should have been scattered and helpless were working together with incredible efficiency. They shared resources, protected each other's children, and built new communities from nothing. The reports puzzled Zephyrian military leaders. According to their understanding of warfare, defeated populations should surrender or scatter. Instead, humans seemed to become more determined after each defeat. They learned from their losses and adapted their tactics. They found ways to hide that Sci-Fi and sensors could not detect. They created weapons from scrap metal that could damage advanced armor. Most confusing of all, they fought not just for themselves, but for each other. Human soldiers would risk their lives to save wounded comrades, even when retreat was the logical choice. Parents would sacrifice themselves to protect their children. Communities would use their last resources to help strangers who had nowhere else to go. Zaxthul began to understand that what Zephyrians saw as human weakness was actually their greatest strength. Their emotional connections did not make them vulnerable. Instead, those connections gave them something to fight for that was more powerful than any weapon. When Luna learned to say, "love you," in both human and Zephyrian words, Zaxthil finally understood what that meant. Love was not just an emotion. It was a force that could make ordinary people do extraordinary things. It could make a tiny child trust a fearsome warrior. It could make that warrior risk everything to protect someone. Who should have been his enemy. Luna had also begun showing remarkable intelligence and curiosity about the world around her. She would point at things and ask, "What?" in her small voice until Zaxthil explained them to her. She learned new words every day and could solve simple puzzles that he made for her. She had even figured out how to operate some of the basic controls on his computer terminal, though he was careful to keep her away from anything important. One day, while Zaxthil was cleaning his weapons, Luna managed to climb onto his desk and accidentally activated his communication system. For a moment, her babbling voice was broadcast to every soldier in his section before he could shut it off. He quickly claimed it was a malfunction in his equipment, but several soldiers asked questions about the strange sounds they had heard. Lieutenant Vexmar was especially suspicious. "That sounded almost like a human child, Commander," he said during their next briefing. "But of course, that would be impossible. Equipment malfunctions can create many strange sounds," Zaxthil replied calmly. "I will have the technicians check my communication array." But he knew that his time was running out. Luna was getting bigger and more active every day. Soon it would be impossible to keep her hidden. Other soldiers were already asking questions about his strange behavior and the odd sounds coming from his quarters. As he watched Luna playing with a small toy he had made for her, Zaxthil realized that his greatest fear was not being discovered. His greatest fear was what would happen to this innocent child who had taught him the true meaning of strength, love, and courage. She deserved so much more than a life spent hiding in a storage compartment, but she also deserved to live, and Zaxthil would do whatever it took to make sure that happened. Luna was now 3 years old, and keeping her hidden had become nearly impossible. She was smart, curious, and full of energy. Every day she asked more questions and wanted to explore beyond the small hidden room that had been her entire world. She would press her face against the tiny window in Zaxthil's quarters and ask about the other soldiers she could see walking around the base. "Who are they, Zax?" she would ask in her clear voice that mixed human and Zephyrian words together. "Why can they go outside, but I cannot?" Zaxthil struggled to explain in words she could understand. "They are different from us, little one. They would not understand our friendship." "But you are like them," Luna said, touching his armored face with her small hands. "You are big like them." "Yes, but I am different now. You have changed me." It was true. 3 years of caring for Luna had transformed Zaxthil completely. He no longer thought about war and conquest. Instead, he thought about Luna's safety, her happiness, and her future. He had learned to laugh at her silly jokes and to feel proud when she learned new things. He had discovered that watching her grow and learn brought him more satisfaction than any military victory ever had. But their secret world was about to come to an end. It happened on a quiet afternoon when Zaxthil was attending a mandatory briefing about new battle strategies. Luna had been playing quietly in her hidden room, drawing pictures with the colored materials he had brought her. She had drawn many pictures over the years, but her latest one was special. It showed 2 figures holding hands under a bright sun. One figure was tall and armored like a Zephyrian. The other was small with yellow hair like a human child. Luna had been working on escaping from her hiding place for weeks. She was clever and had figured out how to manipulate the locks that Zaxthil thought were child-proof. While he was away, she finally succeeded in opening the door. For the first time in her life, Luna stepped into the main corridor of the Zephyrian military base. The hallway was empty at first, And Luna looked around with wonder at the high ceilings and bright lights. Everything was so much bigger than her small room. She walked down the corridor on unsteady legs, carrying her drawing in one hand and looking for Zax Thul. She did not understand that she was in terrible danger. Sergeant Colthus was the first to see her. He was walking back from the armory when he spotted a small figure in the corridor ahead of him. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. There could not possibly be a human child walking freely through their military base. But as he got closer, there was no denying what he was seeing. A little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes was walking toward him, completely unafraid. She was wearing clothes that looked like they had been made from scraps of military fabric. "Alert! Alert!" Colthus shouted into his communication device. "Human child in main corridor. This is not a drill." Within seconds, alarms began blaring throughout the base. Soldiers came running from every direction, their weapons drawn and ready. Luna found herself surrounded by dozens of massive armored warriors, all pointing their weapons at her tiny form. But Luna was not afraid. She had grown up seeing one armored warrior every day, and these soldiers looked just like her Zax. She smiled at them and held up her drawing. "Look," she said proudly in Zephyrian, "I made a picture." The soldiers stared in shock. Not only was there a human child in their base, but she could speak their language. Several of them took steps backward, unsure of what to do. They had been trained to fight adult human soldiers, not to deal with a 3-year-old girl who smiled at them and wanted to show them her artwork. Lieutenant Vexmar arrived and immediately took charge of the situation. "Secure the child. Find out how she got here. Search every room in this base." Just then, Zax Thul came running down the corridor. His briefing had been interrupted by the emergency alarm, and his heart had dropped when he heard the words, "human child." He knew immediately what had happened. He arrived to find Luna surrounded by soldiers, looking small and confused by all the noise and excitement. When she saw him, her face lit up with joy. "Zax!" she cried out, breaking free from the circle of soldiers and running toward him on her little legs. "I got out. I wanted to find you." The entire corridor fell silent, except for the sound of Luna's footsteps as she ran to her protector. Every soldier watched in stunned disbelief as the human child threw her arms around Zax Thul's armored leg and hugged him tightly. "I missed you," Luna said, looking up at him with complete trust and love. "Are you proud of my picture?" General Vekvar arrived at that moment, his heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. The crowd of soldiers parted to let him through, and he stopped short when he saw the scene before him. One of his most trusted commanders was standing with a human child clinging to his leg, and the child was clearly comfortable with him. "Commander Zax Thul," the general said in a voice that was deadly quiet, "explain this immediately." Zax Thul knew that this was the end of everything. There was no way to hide the truth anymore. No way to pretend that Luna was anything other than what she was. He could try to lie, to claim that he had just found her, but Luna's obvious affection for him made that impossible. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone present. He removed his helmet and knelt down beside Luna, placing himself between her and all the weapons pointed in their direction. "Her name is Luna," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every soldier in the corridor. "I found her 3 years ago in the ruins of New Haven Colony. She was a baby then, abandoned and alone. I chose to save her instead of killing her." The general's eyes blazed with fury. "You have hidden an enemy survivor for 3 years? You have committed treason against the Zephyrian Empire." "Yes," Zax Thul said simply. "I have. The penalty for treason is death, Commander. You know this." "I know this." Luna looked up at Zax Thul with confusion. She could sense the tension in the air, and the loud voices were starting to frighten her. She pressed closer to him and whispered, "Are they angry at us, Zax?" "Do not be afraid, little one," he whispered back in human words that many of the soldiers could understand. "I will not let anything happen to you." General Vekvar raised his weapon and pointed it at both of them. "You will step away from the human, Commander." "Now." But Zaxthul did not move. Instead, he began to speak in a voice that carried the authority of his years as a military leader. "For 3 years, I have watched this child grow," he said. "I have seen her face every day with hope, even though she lost everything. I have watched her learn and laugh and love, despite living in a world that would destroy her if it knew she existed. She has taught me something that our military training never could." He stood up slowly, keeping Luna behind him. "She has taught me what real strength looks like. Humans do not fight because they are aggressive. They fight because they love something worth protecting. Their emotions are not weaknesses. They are the source of courage that lets them face impossible odds and never surrender." Luna peeked out from behind Zaxthil's leg and saw all the soldiers staring at her. She was still not afraid, but she wanted to help somehow. She held up her drawing again, the one that showed a Zephyrian and a human standing together under the sun. "I made this for everyone," she said in her sweet voice, "so we can all be friends." The simple innocence of her words hit the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. Here was a child who should hate them, who should fear them, offering friendship. Instead, the corridor remained frozen, tense silence. General Vekvar kept his weapon aimed at Zaxthul and Luna, while dozens of other soldiers watched and waited for orders. Luna stood behind her protector, still holding her drawing, not fully understanding the danger, but sensing that something very important was happening. "You have 10 seconds to step away from the human, Commander," General Vekvar said coldly. "This is your final warning." But instead of moving away from Luna, Zaxthul did something that sent shock waves through every soldier present. He reached down and gently lifted the little girl into his arms, holding her protectively against his chest. "No," he said simply. "I will not abandon her." The general's finger moved toward the trigger of his weapon. "Then you will both die for your treason." Just as he was about to fire, something unexpected happened. Sergeant Kolthas stepped forward and removed his helmet, revealing his scarred face to everyone present. In Zephyrian military culture, removing your helmet during a confrontation was a sign of standing with someone, even if it meant facing the same punishment. "Sir," Kolthas said firmly, "I request permission to speak." "Stand down, Sergeant." The general barked, "This is not your concern." But Kolthas did not back away. "With respect, sir, I think it is everyone's concern. Commander Zaxthul has served with honor for over 15 years. He has saved countless Zephyrian lives in battle. If he says this child has taught him something important about our enemies, then perhaps we should listen." Lieutenant Vexmar looked confused and angry. "She is just a human child. She means nothing." "Does she?" Another voice called out. It was Private Dokmar, a young soldier who had served under Zaxthil's command during several battles. He also removed his helmet as he spoke. "I have been watching Commander Zaxthil for months, wondering why he seemed different. Now I understand. He has been protecting something innocent instead of just destroying things. Maybe that takes more courage than any of us realized." Luna looked around at all the soldiers with curious eyes. She was not afraid, but she could tell that everyone was upset. In her 3 years of life, she had learned that when people were upset, sometimes a hug could make things better. She reached out from Zaxthulai's arms toward the nearest soldier. "Why are you sad?" she asked in Zephyrian, her voice small but clear. "Do you want to see my picture?" The soldier she had reached toward was a grizzled veteran named Captain Rexler. He had fought in more battles than most soldiers could count, and had never shown mercy to any enemy. But when the tiny human child looked at him with genuine concern for his feelings, something inside his chest felt strange and unfamiliar. Slowly, almost without realizing what he was doing, Captain Rexler removed his helmet as well. "I would like to see your picture," he said quietly. Luna smiled brightly and held up her drawing. It showed two stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. One was tall and armored, the other small with long hair. Around them were stars and flowers that she had drawn with careful attention to detail. "This is you and me, Zax," she explained, pointing to the figures. "And this is the sun that makes everything grow. Mama told me about the sun before she went to sleep forever." The mention of Luna's lost mother sent another wave of silence through the assembled soldiers. Here was a child who had lost everything, yet still drew pictures of friendship and hope. Several more soldiers quietly removed their helmets. "General." Dekvar looked around at his troops with growing alarm. "What is happening here? Put your helmets back on." This is not a debate. But the movement continued to spread. One by one, more soldiers stepped forward and removed their helmets. Some of them had served with Zaxthul for years and trusted his judgment. Others were simply moved by Luna's innocent courage in the face of so much hostility. Lieutenant Vexmar remained loyal to the general. "Sir, your orders are clear. This human is an enemy survivor. She must be eliminated." "Yes," General Lekvar said, raising his weapon again. "Stand aside, all of you, or face charges of treason." Luna saw the weapon pointed at her and Zaxthul. For the first time since leaving her hiding place, she looked frightened. But instead of crying or trying to hide, she did something that shocked everyone present. The little girl climbed down from Zaxthul's arms and walked directly toward General Lekvar, carrying her drawing in both hands. The massive warrior looked down at the tiny figure approaching him, unsure of what to do. "Please, do not be angry," Luna said, looking up at him with her bright blue eyes. "I made this picture for everyone. See, we can all be friends under the same sun." She held up the drawing toward the general with complete trust, just as she had done with Zaxthul 3 years ago in the ruins of her world. Her small hands were steady, and her voice was calm and hopeful. General Lekvar stared down at the child in complete confusion. In all his years of military service, he had never faced anything like this moment. This tiny human who should have been terrified of him was offering him a gift. She was treating him not as an enemy, but as someone who might become a friend. The drawing itself was simple, but the message was clear. Luna had drawn a world where Zephyrians and humans could exist together peacefully. In her innocent mind, the war was not about conquest or hatred. It was just a misunderstanding that could be solved with kindness and friendship. "She has been in our base for 3 years," Captain Rexler said quietly. "If humans were truly as dangerous as we have been taught, would not this child have tried to harm us somehow? Instead, she offers us friendship. She speaks our language," added Private Dokmar. "She has learned our ways. But she has not forgotten her own humanity. Look at her. Does she seem like an enemy to you?" General Lekvar continued to stare at Luna, his weapon still raised, but no longer pointed directly at her. The child waited patiently for him to take her drawing, her face full of hope and trust. Finally, the general lowered his weapon. With one massive hand, he carefully took the drawing from Luna's small fingers. As he looked at the simple picture of friendship and peace, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of the war they had been fighting. "What is your name, child?" he asked quietly. "Luna," she replied with a bright smile. "Zax gave me that name because he said I am like the moon that brings light to dark places." The general looked at Zaxthul with new understanding. "You have cared for her all this time? Yes, sir. She has taught me more about courage and strength than any battle ever could. Humans fight so hard because they have something worth protecting. They have love, hope, and the ability to see goodness even in their enemies. General Dekvar was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that changed the course of galactic history. He knelt down to Luna's level and spoke to her as an equal. Thank you for your gift, Luna. It is very beautiful. The little girl clapped her hands together with joy. Now we can all be friends. Zax, did you see? He likes my picture. What happened next spread throughout the galaxy faster than any military communication. The story of a Zephyrian commander who risked everything to protect a human child, and of that child's innocent offer of friendship to her would-be executioner, became a symbol of hope for both species. The war did not end immediately, but it began to change into something different. Soldiers on both sides started to question whether their enemies were truly as evil as they had been taught. Secret communications began between human and Zephyrian leaders, exploring the possibility of peace. Years later, when Luna had grown into a young woman, she served as an ambassador between the two species. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of love and courage could change the destiny of entire civilizations. And Zax Thul, honored as a hero by both humans and Zephyrians, never forgot the day when a 3-year-old girl had taught an entire military base that friendship was stronger than fear, and that hope could survive even in the darkest of times.